Howdy, howdy, folks. Once again, it is Donnie, and today we're going to talk about Linux firewall stuff. Specifically, we're going to talk about firewalld, which is Red Hat's mysterious firewall manager. So why is firewalld a mystery? Well, Red Hat does a good job of documenting how to use it, so yeah, you can go to their website and pull up the firewalld documentation, and if you want to know how to create your firewall rules or delete your firewall rules or whatever else, the documentation there tells you how to do that. But the Red Hat documentation does not tell you how firewalld actually works. Doesn't tell you how it's structured, how it works under the hood, or anything like that. So because of that, there's a little bit of confusion about it. Distros that use firewalld are Red Hat Enterprise Linux. Well, of course, it was invented by Red Hat, so yeah. And its many clones, including CentOS, Alma Linux, Rocky Linux, Oracle Enterprise Linux, and a few others which are lesser known. And of course, it's also used by Fedora, which is a product of Red Hat, or it's sponsored by Red Hat, I should say. And it is available as an option for some non-Red Hat distros, like, for example, Ubuntu, probably for Debian as well, since Ubuntu's derived from Debian. I don't know that for a fact. And maybe a few others. I don't really know. Now, before we get into clearing up these mysteries, we need to nail down some terminology just to make sure that we're all on the same page. The first thing we need to know is that the name of the actual Linux firewall is netfilter. This is the actual packet filtering code that's built into the Linux kernel. But we cannot directly interface with netfilter. In order to do that, we need some sort of a helper program. And we started out long time ago with something called IP chains. So IP chains was with us up through kernel version 2.4. And then when kernel version 2.6 came out, IP chains was replaced with IP tables. IP tables is still with us. It's still the default firewall manager for a lot of Linux distros. And then a few years ago, the Red Hat engineers invented something a bit newer and a bit fancier called nftables. nftables has some performance advantages over IP tables, and it's also somewhat easier to configure. Now, both of these two programs are helper programs for netfilter. So since we cannot directly interface with netfilter, we're going to instead interface with either IP tables or nftables. So both of these two programs do two different things for us. They both provide a command line interface for us to create our commands at the command line, or to create our firewall rules at the command line, or delete rules, or modify them as the need arises. But that's one function. The other function is that when you create those rules, these programs will insert those rules into netfilter. So these two programs are the go-between between the human user and netfilter. Now, you can, as I said, you can use either IP tables or nftables directly from the command line to create your rules, but you don't have to. There are also different front ends for either IP tables or nftables. For example, if you are on a desktop Linux machine with a graphical desktop interface, there's a good chance you'll never need to use these rules from the command line, because you have graphical front ends for them. So when you go to the graphical program and add or delete or change a firewall rule, then that graphical front end is going to interface with either IP tables or nftables, which in turn will interface with netfilter. There are also some command line front ends for IP tables and nftables. And of course, one of those is the subject of today's video, which is firewalld. So, firewalld then is not a standalone firewall manager program. Firewalld has to interface with either IP tables or nftables. And on Red Hat 7 type distros, firewalld interfaces with IP tables. On Red Hat 8 type distros, it interfaces with nftables. And so whenever you go to the command line and do a firewall-cmd command to create a new rule, then it's going to inject that rule into either IP tables or nftables, which in turn will inject it into netfilter. All right, so now let's go to our Rocky Linux virtual machine here. This is going to be Rocky Linux 8, and I'll show you some more stuff. So there's a Rocky Linux virtual machine, and of course the type is way too small for us to see. So what I did here is I just opened up some terminals here on my Lubuntu host machine and just increased the font size. Now we can see it. So here in the etc directory, we have a firewalld directory, and you see there it's configured so that only the root user can go into it. So let's make things simpler by going to the root shell. And you can see the various directories there. And if we go into the zones directory, we see there that we have a public.xml file. And what the zones business is all about is that you have a lot of different zones that you can choose from when you set up a firewalld firewall. Now, by default, when you first install your operating system on a Red Hat type system, it's going to come with the public zone already configured for you and already active. So what each of these zones is, it's just a collection of the ports that are open for that particular zone, right? So with the public zone, you see here we have the secure shell port open, and we have a DHCP v6 client port open, and we have the cockpit port open. And cockpit, of course, is Red Hat's web-based server manager utility. So those are the three ports that are open here for the public zone. And of course, public zone, it says here, you don't trust other computers or networks to not harm your computer. And lots of other zones, as I said, for different purposes. There's a DMZ zone, for example, for servers that are in your demilitarized zone on your enterprise network. There's a home zone, I think it's called, which works well for if you're in the home and you trust the other computers on your network a little bit better. And all of them have different ports that are open. Now, thing is, setting up a firewall is more than just opening ports, right? So you got to have, like, for example, your connection tracking rules. You got to have your default blocking rules and your forwarding table rules. Lots of other stuff that you need in a firewall. in order to make it work. But none of that's here in this firewalld directory. So what we need to do then is figure out where all that stuff is. Well, first off, now we can also pull up our nftables rule set. And I'm going to show you here that all three of those open ports that we just looked at are here in the nftable rules. And I'm going to pipe this into less, just to make it easier to find stuff. And you can cruise on down there if you like and see what all is there. Let's go back to the top and hit the slash key. I'm going to hit 22 or type 22. And so there then is our rule that we just saw in the public zone, which opens up the secure shell port. And here is a rule that opens up the DHCP version 6 client port. And this is one of the advantages of nftables over IP tables. With nftables, you can mix your IPv4 and IPv6 rules all in the same configuration. With IP tables, you have to have the one IP tables daemon running for the IPv4 and another completely separate one for IPv6, and you have to configure those rules two different times. If you're running both IPv4 and IPv6, you have to configure all of your rules twice in order to have them covered by both. But here with nftables, you can have everything here all in the same configuration file. So it makes it really, really handy. And also, this is your cockpit port. Okay, so those are all three of the rules that we saw in that firewalld directory. And again, as I said, the nftables will just pick up those rules, or actually, I guess firewalld will feed those rules into nftables, and nftables will convert them into actual nftables rules, as we see here. Now, let's try something else. Let's open up port 8080 TCP and see what happens. And we'll use firewall-cmd for that. If you were running just straight nftables on this machine, you would use an nft rule to open up a port. But with firewalld, you can't do that. The only nft rule you can use is just to list your rule set. So with firewalld, you're going to use the firewall-cmd command. We're going to add port equals 8080 /TCP, like so, and success. Now this is a temporary rule. If I want to make it permanent, I would have to add a -- permanent in here, which I did not do. Okay, so we're not actually changing that configuration file in the firewalld directory just yet. But anyway, let's go ahead here and look at our rule set again. And we'll type 8080. And yes, there is our new rule. And of course, by not putting that -- permanent option in there, this will disappear the next time we boot the machine. Yeah, so you see there, I did not add anything. Now, if I wanted to, I could just do like that. And now you see that I've added this rule to the configuration file. So now it is permanent. Next time I reboot this machine, then this will get picked up and the port will be open. Okay, so anyway, the things we see in the rule set, you see lots of different tables here. Most of them are empty. We're not really using them just other than the default accept policies, different things there. But if we go on down here, we're going to see more interesting stuff, of course. And so there is our pre-routing chain in the iNet firewall D table. And I'm not going to go through what all this stuff is, but just accept the fact for right now that all this stuff is actually setting up the firewall with all of the default stuff that you would have in a normal firewall to make it all work, right? Your connection tracking rules and lots of other stuff there. And we also see our default deny rules, for example, in here. Lots of other stuff. All right. But anyway, so what makes all this work then? Well, this is where the real mystery is, because this is the part that Red Hat does not document at all. In fact, nobody has ever documented it. Well, except for me. I'll tell you about that here in just a little bit. But this is one of those things where you can do DuckDuckGo searches or Google searches or start page searches, whatever search engine you want to use. You can search the internet till you're blue in the face. You're not going to find an answer to how Firewall D really works under the hood. And in order for me to find out, I had to do quite a few hours worth of detective work in order to find the answer. And the answer is here in this directory. It's on this Rocky Linux 8 machine. We're looking at the usrlib Python 3.6 site-packages firewall core directory. And on a Red Hat 7 type machine, that part of the directory name would be different because it's using a different version of Python. But on a Red Hat 8 type of machine, this is where we're going to look. And we can do it ls-l, and we see a whole bunch of Python scripts. And the script that we really want to look at is right here, nftables.py. And if we were looking at a Red Hat 7 type machine, that would be iptables.py. But in Red Hat 8, it's nftables.py, and we can look in there, and we can see it's a Python script. Please don't ask me to explain all the nitty-gritty details of this because I'm not a Python programmer, not an expert at it anyway. But what I can tell you here is that this script is using the built-in libraries for Python and the different functions that are built into the Python libraries in order to build nftables rules. And this script gets run every time you boot the machine, every time you restart Firewall D. So yeah, there's a firewalld service. I forgot to tell you about that. But every time you restart the firewalld service, it will run the script and it will build your nftables rule set. Now, you'll never, ever want to modify this file. Just leave this file alone. Whenever you need to add new rules, use that firewall-cmd command. And that way, everything will work normally. And again, as I said, also, never, never, never add a rule with a regular nft command. Just use that firewall-cmd command and you'll be good. All right. So anyway, I think that's pretty much it there for the coverage of firewalld, and just to be able to clear up the mysteries about how it really works. And as I said, there's confusion about it. People, a lot of people don't understand the relationship of firewalld to nftables. So hopefully this has helped. Now, if you ever want to read more about firewalld or any of the other firewall technologies that are in use, or any other different security topics, then check out my book, Linux Security and Hardening, which is available at packedpub.com and at Amazon. And of course, I will include the purchase links in the video description below. If you're a Linux administrator, or if you're studying to be a Linux administrator, then definitely check out this book. It can really, really help you out. And it's if you're put off by trying to read technical books, well, I can tell you, I write in an entertaining manner, okay? So, because I don't like boring books, and you shouldn't like them either. So, I write in a conversational style. I throw a little bit of humor in there to try to break the monotony of things. So I think you really, really enjoy reading it. So yeah, as I said, be sure to check this out. But anyway, that's about it for this video. Be sure to like and subscribe and share the video out, and we'll see you next time.